I had the opportunity to spend some time with them a few weeks ago, or maybe 1 week ago, in the waiting room, and I see them popping on so I can see their faces. Yes. Hi, Dr. Murray. We have
Hi, lovely to be here.
Yay, so glad to have you. And I know Dr. Duncan is here. I don't see her, but I do see her in the chat. So that is great. So up there she is. She's going to pop on. Yes, perfect. Your slides look great. I'm actually going to go off and I'm going to give you the floor. I want to be able to provide you with a proper introduction. So without further ado, I am so privileged and honored to have Dr. Sandra Duncan and Dr. Kathryn Murray here with us today. Dr. Duncan is an international consultant, author of 7 books focused on the environmental design of early childhood places, designer of 2 furniture collections called Sense of Place and Sense of Place for Wee Ones, and an adjunct faculty at Nova Southeastern University. Dr. Duncan has designed and taught university courses. She's built on early childhood learning environment. She's collaborated with architects, designers, interior designers, and educators all over to create some pretty extraordinary places and possibilities for all children and students of all ages. Her partner in crime, Dr. Kathryn Murray, focus is to really help educators and parents give each child the best possible start to their life. She's a creator of Brain Set formula for classroom design and works with educators globally to develop indoor and outdoor spaces that align with brain development. Dr. Murray is an international early childhood consultant, author of numerous articles and book chapters, and designer and writers of a range of courses with adjunct faculty members at Central Queensland University in Australia, one of my favorite places. Wow, wouldn't that be something to go see the environments? She's currently writing her Brain Set formula book designed to guide the development of wonderful and exciting learning environments for all children and educators. So without further ado, I'm truly honored and just gracious for these presenters to be with us today. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm Sandra. Both of us will be presenting today, and I'd just like to welcome you to this presentation called A Calm Brain is a Thinking Brain, Designing Trauma-Informed Learning Environments. Dr. Murray and I are so delighted to be with you today. Now more than ever, our world within the school walls are very, very much in a tailspin. Our hearts are broken for the students, the families, the children, the parents in Texas. As we move through this presentation, may we all be very mindful of the tragic loss of not only lives, but of the human spirit. The purpose of this workshop is to discuss 3 things: adverse experiences in classroom design, brain development in classroom design, and Brain Set framework for classroom design, which is Dr. Murray's brainchild. I will present a few design strategies and characteristics which are important to consider when designing learning environments. And then Dr. Murray will review and introduce you to this very, very exciting Brain Set formula. She'll give you some easy to implement ideas for classroom design. So let's get started. The first section of this presentation is talking about the link between adverse child experiences and classroom design.
Sandra, I think we lost you. I think we lost sound. It looks like you're talking.
Oh,
Oh, there you go. Okay, there you go.
okay. All right, let's see. It's for some reason my screen's not moving ahead. Oh, there we go. Woo, scared me for a minute. So I'm going to try to turn my video off and let me know if that doesn't work.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Yes, I can
So,
hear you.
okay, adverse childhood experiences, they're called ACEs, and they include experiences such as physical, emotional, sexual abuse, domestic violence, mental illness, substance abuse, and incarceration. It also includes things like parents' divorce or separating. According to experts, ACEs can also be including victim or witness to traumatic experiences such as school shootings, suicides, racism, peer bullying, and a host of other toxic stressors. Some experts are beginning to theorize and study the adverse childhood experience of COVID-19. Regardless of the type of adverse childhood experiences that children experience, studies have revealed, and I found this so interesting, but they've revealed a remarkable relationship between our emotional experiences that we have as children, and they connect it up with what happens to us as adults, like health issues such as cancer or COPD or heart attacks. So trauma-informed classroom design then becomes very, very important when we're thinking about positive classroom experiences. Trauma is not a new concept, you know. People have been experiencing trauma for decades. What I found interesting was at a study that was recently conducted called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, the researchers found 67% of adults have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience. And 12.6%, oh my goodness, have experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. If these statistics alone call for us to begin thinking about how we design our learning environments. Until about 2 years ago, I never even thought about this. But then I was listening to Dr. Murray in a presentation she was giving online during COVID, and I became quickly aware, like this light bulb, this light switch just switched on, and I thought, oh my goodness, I need to start thinking about designing our classrooms that take into account the trauma that children may have already experienced by the time they reach your early childhood classroom. It tells us we need to redesign our learning environments, not only at the early childhood level, but also they're beginning to start to think about designing trauma-informed classrooms for older children, like older students, like high school students. So when designing trauma-informed learning environments, or any environment for that matter, there are, of course, these big picture designs, like shelter, 4 walls, you know, the ceiling, all those kinds of things, basic shelter needs like being safe and secure. But architects and interior designers and space planners, they've all started to integrate more than this big picture, more than the blueprints, more than those 4 walls, the ceiling, the floor, the doors. They're starting to think and move past this traditional, what's called in designing high schools, the traditional cells and bells design. I don't know if you've heard about this, but a cells and bells design, if you think about it, when you went to high school and you walk in the front door and you walk down the corridor or the hallway of the high school, what usually happens is on the left-hand side, there's a row of classrooms, and on the right-hand side, there's a row of classrooms, and students according to this idea, are in cells. And when the bell rings, students just go from one cell into another cell. And that's called the cells in bells design. It's a traditional design where the teacher stands at the head of the classroom and spews out knowledge, all of her knowledge, and expects the high school students to capture that knowledge. So that's called the cells and bells. It's a big picture design, but architects are now starting to move past this idea. They're now starting to think about an emotional based classroom design, a student-led spaces. And so we have wonderful architects such as Prakash Nair, who's written several books on it. You might want to look him up. It's Prakash Nair, Nair, pronounced Prakash Nair. He's breaking down these traditional four-wall design, cells and bells type of design for high schools and for junior high school, middle schools and for junior high schools. And he's starting to think in favor of this cells and bells design. He's thinking in favor of a student-centered learning design. And this type of design puts students at the center of the design. And it includes spaces like Prakash suggests, learning studios, cave spaces, campfire spaces where you all gather around the circle like you gather around a campfire, watering hole spaces, project studios, outdoor learning terraces, greenhouses, and an entrance piazza. So elementary, junior high, high school, college students and institutions, they're beginning to also think about something called a calming room, like you see in this picture right here. Calming rooms are places where high school students, junior high, can go and regroup themselves and recenter themselves. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be able to go to a conference in August. It's called the MTSSPLI conference in California and Anaheim, and the Orange County Department of Education and CHOC, the Children's Health of Orange County, they've teamed up to offer things in their county called Wellspaces. Wellspace Center. It's a place where students can go take a moment to unplug, relax, and recenter. The Wellspace Centers, as part of Orange County Department of Education and CHOC, they are part of a multifaceted program that's created to fortify the mental health, not just the classroom, but the mental health of children and teenagers across Orange County and California. So that Dr. Kathryn Murray's presentation, and then I started digging into trauma-informed design, and I learned about the Orange County Wellspace. That got me thinking, why can't we do this for early childhood classrooms? So today we're not going to focus on that big picture, that Prakash Nair picture. We're going to focus on the individual classroom, your individual classroom. The purpose of this presentation is to help you understand trauma-informed design and help you offer ideas and strategies that can be done right now. The minute you finish this presentation, right after this conference, you can improve environments for our young children. These ideas are specific to trauma-informed design, but I have to tell you, they can also be generalized to any learning environment for young children. So, what's the overarching design characteristic of trauma-informed classrooms? Let's look at that. Let's go to the second part of this presentation that discusses some important characteristics of trauma-informed design. How can we design and set up our classrooms and so it can influence the emotions, the behaviors, the thinking that goes on in that space? What can we do? let's look at some environmental characteristics to consider. What I'd like to do is perhaps introduce you to a new term. It was a new term to me. Maybe it's not to you, but it's called hygge. Hygge is a Danish term and a concept. It means warmth, well-being, togetherness, comfort. Basically, what I think it means is calm. Based on what we now know about children who have experienced trauma and all the children who may have experienced trauma in your classrooms, it's important to do away with our chaotic environments. It's important to create calm spaces. Here's a few ways that we can introduce hygge into our classrooms. One way is light. Not all light is created equal. I have to tell you that. Natural light is the best kind of light. It's natural. It's the worst kind of, compared to the worst kind of light, which is fluorescent lights. We all pretty much have fluorescent lights in our classroom. For children with trauma issues, however, I learned that these fluorescent lights are very problematic. And I think they're problematic to all of our children, quite frankly. These types of lights emit harsh glare, flicker, and they buzz. You might not hear it, but they do buzz. And it's uncomfortable for some children, especially children with trauma issues. Try eliminating the sensory trigger of fluorescent lights by turning them off completely. I remember the first time I went into a classroom and there were no fluorescent lights on. The only kind of light in that classroom was the natural light coming through the windows and ambient lighting by the floor lights, the table lights, the table lamps. So try to use ambient lighting in your classroom. Switch off your fluorescent lights if you can. Keep windows clear of non-transparent decor, such as stickers or construction paper or children's artwork. If you do not have the luxury of windows, and I know some of you don't, turn to ambient lighting such as floor or table lamps. If possible, install dimmers or three-way switches on the table lamps or the floor lamps. And I've heard it's expensive, but I also have heard that you can install dimmers on fluorescent lights. That's a great idea if you can afford it and if you can get it done in your particular classroom or center. The second kind of hygge that I'd like to talk about is noise. Children with trauma issues are sensitive to overwhelming noise. And this is something I learned and I didn't know. I knew, sudden noise is probably traumatic to children, but what I didn't know was this steady negative type of noise can be very stressful to children with trauma issues. One idea to eliminate this steady negative noise is turn off those fluorescent lights like we just talked about. But you can also maybe use sound absorption tactics like lowering the ceiling. And Kathryn, Dr. Murray, is going to talk about how you can lower the ceiling a little bit later in the presentation. You can infuse area rugs like overstuffed pieces of furniture like you see in the back of this classroom, pillows, wall tapestries, soundproofing, acoustic tiles. I was in a classroom just recently and they had actually put sound acoustic tiles on the wall. Not only were they very decorative and looked beautiful on the wall, but they were also absorbing some of the sound in the classroom. I've even seen Oriental rug stapled up to the wall to act as a sound absorber. Trauma-informed design experts suggest soft, comfortable water sounds like this small water table fountain. It adds calming sounds to the room, especially at nap time when the room is relatively quiet. We all know early childhood classrooms are never totally quiet. one of the things I learned that was really interesting to me was we all have music perhaps plugged into our classrooms or into our hallways, but I've learned that music with words is not as good as music without words. So I'm suggesting to you from the research that I've done that use music without words and play it at intervals throughout the day, not the entire day. Because what I learned was that children with trauma issues don't like that steady, constant music, even noise, even though it's a beautiful sound of music, they don't like it, the steady constantness of it. So another type is visual huga. Children with trauma issues are oversensitive. Now this is really important, I think, to disorder and too much visual stimuli. Think about your classroom right now. What does it look like? Is there too much visual stimuli? Experts who work with trauma-inflicted patients say that too much stuff hanging over their head, and again, this was new to me, stuff hanging over their head, because children with trauma issues, what they have suffered, they're always on hypervigilance. They're always looking around them. They're always checking out what's coming at them. And so something hanging over their head, they don't like it. They feel uncomfortable about it. It might be good if you thought about what's hanging from your ceiling and how much is hanging from your ceiling. It might be good if you intentionally be intentional about what you hang on your ceiling, and don't hang too much and don't hang it really, really low, so that the children with trauma issues are distracted and feel uncomfortable about what's over their heads. It would be also very good if you could curb overly decorated walls. Research conducted with 5 to 8-year-old children suggests that the colorfulness of your distal, that's wall decorations, and proximal, that's your table decorations or your shelves, can have a disruptive effect on children's interactions, their engagement, and their attention to learning materials. If you're interested in this study, at the end of this presentation, there's a reference list, and you can read that study. It's very easy to read, and the results are significant. Consider reducing, we're going to suggest, what's on your walls by 50% to eliminate that visual overload and what becomes known as really visual noise. Physical huga. Effectively designed trauma-informed classrooms are not overcrowded with furniture. Take a look at this classroom. It's a beautiful classroom from a center in Ohio. It's called Kids Country. Create what's known as, again, a new term to me, what's known as gracious circulation. Think about your own classroom. Do you have opportunity for children to graciously circulate around the room? We know that children with trauma and sensory processing disorders need to navigate the classroom without touching others. Some traumatized children feel threatened by the closeness, and because they're always monitoring for safety, they're always looking for the way out. They are also always looking for a way to get out. So classroom safety, that is a classroom that is designed and overly designed and has too much furniture, that's a problem for children with trauma issues. They're overloaded with furniture, it causes congestion, and that for children with trauma issues becomes an emotional and physical demanding environment. Children with these issues need visibility. They want to see who's coming and going. They want to find a place for refuge, such as the circlescapes that you can see on the right. Consider improving children's circulation, that gracious circulation idea, by reducing the number of shelves, figuring out points of refuge, and more than one. You know, I know that lots of teachers think to themselves, well, I have one quiet area. I have one quiet place for children to go. I'm here to tell you, and I think Dr. Murray would agree with me, we need more than one place for children to go. We need more than one place of refuge for children to be. Safety Huga is the thing about children with traumatized children monitor for perceived threats. So they need open visibility. They need to see what's going around them. The notion of wayfinding or being able to visualize their way out or their way to a safe space is an important psychological strategy. So cluttered spaces or areas surrounded by pieces of furniture make them feel like it's hard to escape. It's hard to find safety. It's hard to find refuge. So places where children can seek higher levels, such as platforms, lower steps or lofts, is a welcome addition for children who have experienced trauma. Biophilic Huga is, we all know the positive effects of nature for children, but especially those children who with trauma experience or toxic stressors. Access to the outside, both physically and visually, is a plus. Incorporating textures of nature, such as the brick wall you see here. Also, the idea about representation of nature through photographs and child-made natural art. Finally, with biophilic Huga, think about infusing nature, but also think about this idea. I've recently read a book called Joyful, The Surprising Power of Ordinary Things to Create Extraordinary Happiness in Our Lives. It's by Ingrid Lee. She talks about things that can make us happy and mentions that even the shape of a plant, think about the plants in your classroom. Think about, do you have any plants that are round on their leaves? She says even the shape of the plants can have an effect on joy and happiness in your classroom. She says that circular plants are the most effective. This is a dollar plant, I think, or a money plant, it's called. I went out and bought this plant because I really didn't believe what she was telling me about circular plants. Guess what? I smile every time I look at that plant. Try circular plants in your classroom. So finally, my part of the presentation, think about the 3 R's of environmental design. The organization COTS, or Committee on Temporary Shelter, they actually follow 4 R's, but I'm going to suggest 3 R's, is realizing the importance of physical environment, recognizing the impact that our physical environment has on children, especially children with emotionally trauma experiences in their life, recognizing that our environment can impact their behavior, their learning, their psychological state, their physiological state, their emotional state. Our environments can impact children. We have to realize it. So if we realize it and we recognize it, then we have to respond to it. And Kathryn, Dr. Murray, is going to talk about these ideas that you can do.
Thank you, Sandra. And I'm sure Sandra has shared with you some concepts that perhaps you hadn't heard of before. I hadn't until Sandra shared them with me. So thank you, Dr. Duncan, for sharing some new concepts for us that weaves really nicely into the brain set formula for classroom design. And the third part of this presentation is all about my brain set formula for classroom design. This is my original work and it's been implemented in several countries globally. I'm very fortunate to have been able to train educators across the world. So I'm pleased to be able to do that. And really the basis for this is thinking about the way we design our classroom with the needs of the brain in mind. And it's really important that we think about this when we're discussing the needs of a child who has experienced trauma, as Sandra has shared with us. So as I share this approach to classroom design, you'll notice the light, the visual, the physical, the safety, the biophilic yoga being reflected in the pillars and elements of the classroom design that Dr. Duncan has shared with you. So let's move on to this now, the brain set formula for classroom design. So if we keep the needs of the brain in mind and the influence of trauma when we think about the design and setup of the classroom, then we see how important it is to have a calm brain to empower children to make memorable moments. Well-planned spaces offer opportunities for empowerment, influence our thoughts, our emotions, and the actions that we show. So I want you to think about your own house just for a moment. So think about the shape of your house. Basically, all houses are the shape of a rectangle with smaller rectangles or squares inside that overall rectangle. And that breaks up the spaces, and each space is used for a specific purpose. So think about your kitchen, that's a little square within the rectangle. Think about a bedroom, another square within your rectangle. And each of them has a special purpose. So now I'd like you to think about a room in your house that you love. You love the way the light comes through the windows, the positioning of the furniture, the way the room makes you feel, and the activities that you do in that room. Maybe even the accomplishments you achieve in that room. That room brings up emotion that is linked to your memory and your experiences within that room. Now, that's the same as a classroom. When we think about classroom design, it's the same underlying concept. Basically a rectangle that can be divided into smaller spaces for specific purposes. So when we think about how we design our classrooms and what we do within our classrooms, we have the opportunity to make wonderful spaces that draws positive emotion, memories, and experiences for young children. And that's what I'd like to uncover a little more in this presentation. So put simply, the brain is made up of 3 levels. Now, we know that there's lots of regions and lots of parts of the brain, but for this presentation, let's just look at it simply. The brain's made up of basically 3 levels. From the bottom up, we start with the reptilian brain. In utero, the brain stem develops first for survival. It's the part of the brain that manages the involuntary responses, such as breathing, digestion, blinking, all of those things that we do in an involuntary way. And that part of the brainstem, is there to keep us safe and make sure we survive. Now, as we move up one, we get to the mammalian brain, and it's located behind the ear. And this is where the limbic system houses the amygdala, and that's linked to emotions. Emotions are connected to the survival part of the brain, and those two work together. At the top of the brain is what is called the human brain. It's the neocortex, designed for thinking, memory, problem solving, and many more things. This works most effectively when the 2 lower levels of the brain are taken care of. To connect with children and help them get into a state for learning, we must make sure that they experience a sense of safety. Then help them to connect with their emotions. So feeling happy, feeling loved, secure, valued, worthy, confident, and so on. Then the thinking part of the brain can start to make memories, solve problems, make decisions, communicate clearly, and much more. So addressing the needs of the survival part of the brain and ensuring children have a sense of safety and security is vital when children are experiencing trauma. Heightened levels of stress releases cortisol in the brain. You've probably heard about that. And that stimulates that survival instinct. As humans, when we don't feel safe, we get ready to fight with our words or our hands, flight, run away, or to freeze. So we say nothing and try to disappear. Sometimes the increased level of cortisol gives us a foggy brain where we can't think or remember things. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone and you felt a little anxious or a little rattled? And as you walk away, you think, oh, I should have said that, I should have said something else. It's all because we've got that foggy brain, because the cortisol level is high in our brain, because we feel a little threatened for whatever reason. But for children, when they have this heightened state, they are barely holding it together. Having a sense of security through routines and transitions in our classrooms is one way of calming the brain. Using the brain set formula for classroom design is another way to connect with each level of the brain and reduce trauma and increase thinking and joyful opportunities within the classroom. So classroom spaces that support brain development helps to engage children in their learning. Spaces done well makes for calmer rooms, less behaviour issues, greater oral language development, collaboration, cooperation, decision-making, and much more, because children are feeling relaxed and safe. And I hear comments all the time around this as I train and coach educators in different centres, that once they start to move the furniture around, thinking about the brain, they notice such a difference within the classroom, not only with the children, but with the staff as well, because everyone becomes calmer. And my favourite saying about this is, a calm brain is a thinking brain. So that's the title of our presentation. So it makes sense that if we can design and organise a classroom and the outside environments that complements holistic development, then we have the wonderful privilege of supporting children's growth in brain development and the physical, social, emotional, cognitive and language domains of development. And we do this in a fun and playful way within a brain set classroom. So as we've seen, the brain set formula for classroom design caters to the 3 levels of the brain. And along with recognising the needs of the brain, there are also 3 pillars that support the building of engaged and intentional classroom environments. Each pillar has 5 or 6 elements that form the brain set classroom. We're going to take a look at these elements and the pillars. So all of the elements in the following images work in harmony to calm the brain and help link cognition to emotion through the creation of memories through play and exploration. This is where you'll see the hygge represented. You know, Dr. Duncan and I are often reminded that not all things are perfect. Think about what we notice when we walk on a sidewalk. Often cracks have appeared, but what do we focus on? Do we focus on the crack in the concrete, or do we focus on what we see around us and the destination the sidewalk is leading us to? What we see is what we focus on. Now, I mentioned this because during this section of the presentation, we'll be looking at photos of classrooms and spaces for learning. We might notice some cracks in the sidewalk. In other words, we might not see perfect examples of what we're discussing, but there are still lovely features that we can admire and can inspire us. So I ask that as we look at these images that I'm about to present to you, that we don't look for the cracks, but that we look for the beauty, the purposeful and thoughtful design we see represented in each classroom photo, shared by many dedicated early childhood professionals that have offered these images to Dr. Duncan and I so that we can present them to you. Alrighty, as we begin, we go to the base of the brain and the importance of the brain's need for survival. Having that sense of safety and security has to be achieved before any thinking can occur. We want the cortisol level in the brain to be so low that engagement and learning happens naturally. This is particularly important for children who may have suffered trauma, either prolonged over a period of time or situational, such as going to the hospital. Trauma can be primary or secondary, meaning that a child is directly involved in the trauma or they witness events that cause the trauma. And Dr. Duncan mentioned some of those examples before. Either way, the brain is on high alert. So our classroom design must aim to calm the brain. To help children feel safe, they need to have a range of elements implemented in the classroom. And we need to plan for all of those things that are listed there on the slides, the defined spaces, wayfinding pathways. We'll go through these a little more as we move forward. the lowered ceilings, rooms that aren't too noisy, lighting that's soft and calming, and rounded corners on furniture and floor rugs. So let's take a look at some examples of these elements. So you'll see here that these are defined spaces for one. A safe and defined space for one in the corner of a room gives children a place to be by themselves. And you know what? We all need that sometimes, don't we? I often suggest to educators and teachers that they model some of that behaviour, where they go and just sit by themselves sometimes and model that self-care and that mental health and well-being practices to share with children, so that the children can see that it's okay just to go off by themselves should they need to. Having a small defined space is less threatening for a child, and having open-ended materials allows them to engage in their own way. So there's no expectation, there's only focus and there's engagement. And because it's a small space for one, and they're open-ended materials that are in there, the access for all children is even. So for a child who may be gifted in your classroom, they can use the materials in their own way, and a child who perhaps has some challenges can also use the same materials and use them in a different way. So there's no expectation, there's no examples that the child has to make. There's no black line masters. It's all open-ended materials. And you can see that on the photo there on the left, it's just a little table with just a space for one. On the right-hand side down at the back, that's a little space on the floor just for one child. And you can see another space on the left-hand side of the right-hand photo with those two little cushions on the floor. So that's a little space just for two children. So having those small defined spaces is less threatening for children and feels much safer and much more secure. Using natural colours and timber is calming, and it doesn't distract the eye. Including a range of textures within the space enhances that sensory experience. But we have to be mindful not to overstimulate the senses, as we discussed earlier. It's better to be able to add more sensory aspects as children use the different spaces. The spaces that we provide are defined and purposeful. It's not just about looking nice, it's about the skills to be developed in that space as well. You can see wayfinding and lowered ceilings in the image on the left. So wayfinding is the ability for a child to be able to see the way to the next defined space. And as Dr. Duncan mentioned earlier, children need that ability to be able to manoeuvre between the different spaces in the room to feel safe. They need to be able to see what's next. They need to have that visibility. This classroom on the left-hand side is as an old-style classroom in Australia, in the bottom part of Australia, and really high ceilings. It's an old building. So in this instance, the teacher has used a beach umbrella to lower the ceiling line because she couldn't do much else. And that helps with that psychological containment that we'll talk about in a little while. But it brings everything down so the children feel safer. And you can also see that we've got on the right-hand side there's mirrors being used to add dimension to this space for two children. Books are also included as a stimulus. Adding paper and pens here would increase the opportunity for literacy development. And that's what we want in all of our spaces, opportunities for children to engage with literacy experiences, as well as the hands-on, discovery that we promote. So when we're thinking about our spaces, and think about your own classroom now and your own classroom spaces, think about these questions. What outcomes are we aiming for in each of those spaces? What could be added or taken away to extend the skill development or to extend the learning? Having smaller spaces invites children to participate. Having smaller spaces also means that children have to wait sometimes to use different areas. This builds resilience and patience. It also builds respect for others by appreciating that they have a right to use the space too. It's just not all about me. And we all know that young children are quite egocentric and they do think it's all about them. So having to wait and take turns is a good life skill to be promoting, I think. Lowering the ceiling height is comforting for some children and helps them to experience that sense of security because it feels safe and contained. Using soft furnishings helps to absorb the sounds of engagement so the room is not overwhelmingly noisy. So we mentioned that earlier. Again, it's about the lighting, turning off the overhead lights when there's natural light, or using floor lamps is so much more calming. You can see in the image on the left there that the ceiling has been lowered just by draping some material from the ceiling. Soft lighting in the background there, and nature has been brought into that room. You can also see a soft couch behind that little person in the back corner of that room. On the right-hand side, they've still got the fluoro lights on that could probably be turned off because they're right next to a window. But they've lowered the ceiling line and they've made a couple of different entry points into that space, but it's quite defined, but also very open-ended. So it could be a house, could be a shop, it could be a restaurant, could be anything. So it's open-ended. So we talked about this light hygge earlier with Sandra and how important that is when we're considering the type of lighting that we're using in our classrooms. Rounded corners is another aspect to think about. So the brain feels safer when it sees rounded corners. That's not to say that we can't have anything in our room that's got a sharp edge to it, like a normal table or a normal shelf. It just means that maybe you might want to twist it to an angle or something like that. So rounded corners softens the space and subconsciously takes that perceived danger out of those sharp corners in the room. Adding rounded furniture or putting furniture on an angle softens it all and makes the brain just feel that little, that sense of safety a little more. So then we go on to natural light. And we've mentioned this earlier too, but let's highlight a little with this huge amount of natural light that's coming through this glass wall on this particular centre in Australia as well. And things to think about here is the overhead lights. Do we need to have the overhead lights on when we've got that huge bank of glass along there? We've got a really high ceiling there as well, which, you know, maybe a few beach umbrellas in that room too, just to lower things a little, or maybe hang some things from the ceiling just to you know, bring that ceiling down a little bit more. And also I see in this space, while there's the rounded corners with some mats, there's some defined spaces with the matting, there's spaces there for 2 and 1 children. They've got some of the furniture on an angle, which is all great. But I also see that there's lots of running space there. So, you know, I think we all know when children see a big wide open space, they think that that's a running track. So perhaps moving the furniture slightly out from the wall, perhaps, so that there's more of a ziggy-zaggy effect rather than a long running track or a long corridor might be useful in that space. So now we're moving on to the second part, the second pillar, really. We're talking about the emotions now and the feelings for learning. Softening the classroom environment helps us move away from an institutionalized look and toward a more homely feeling in the classroom. Adding soft furnishings like a couch, the cushions, the floor rugs that you may have, and we've spoken about a little earlier, helps to soften the whole room. In some places I've been to recently, people have said they really can't put much of this into their room because of the COVID rules and the requirements for cleaning, but I understand that. But let's try and just do the best we can, I guess, and trying to incorporate these things. Having neutral colours on the walls, the furniture and the floor instills that calm, and it's not too busy for the brain. Using fairy lights, those floor lamps, those things that we've talked about, the small spaces, that psychological safety helps to add to that calm. We all know that nature is calming, and it can also be inspiring, but it also can be a way to divide the room into smaller spaces. So when we're thinking of this, think about all of those examples of Hugo that we talked about before, and the responding processes and the requirements, and recognising what's needed in our rooms so that we can promote a space that that allows children to have that sense of safety and builds emotions and connections with not only the environment but also the people that are in the environment. So this room is really calming. It's got well-defined spaces, and there's small areas for 1, 2, or a small group. You can see that there's some soft furnishings, there's soft lighting, there's soft colours, and at the back on the left-hand side there, that's a mirror that's on the wall reflecting the room back in, and that reflects that natural light and all those key components to set up that emotional atmosphere of the room. You'll see on the right-hand side, there's like a green table, and then there's that traditional, road map mat that's on the floor that we often see in centres. That's probably my least favourite section of that room design, although I know it's very common, and I mean I had it myself when I was in the classroom, those floor mat things. But I think we could maybe use something different. You'll notice where the arrow is pointing. That's used to be where the teacher's desk was. So that's that gap that's there where the arrow is. That was where the teacher's feet went when she was sitting at her desk. And so she got rid of that desk concept. She took a chair away, and she's made that a small, psychologically safe area for 1 or 2 children to promote that feeling of safety and comfort. So these little spaces allow time away from the world to observe, to think, to daydream, to read, or just to chill out. And you can see that space would normally be the teacher's desk, but she's converted it in a way that makes it more conducive for the children. You can see that next to that space there's shelving with manipulative materials in there as well, and books across the top. This photo was taken during morning, so you can see that some of the materials have been taken out of that teepee tent area, and they're across the floor. But normally there's soft toys and books in that little teepee area, and you can see the different textures of mats on the floor too, with the different senses that are going to be stimulated. So soft furnishings can be as simple as a couch that's donated by a family. And that helps to build that feeling of being familiar and that home-like experience. Now, the key points here are the fairy lights and the curtains, the soft lighting and the furnishings. We've got those defined spaces. You see that there's a lowered roof line on the left-hand side there in that, like just one little chair with the little fairy lights, sparkly lights, and the curtaining around it. To the right of that chair is a bookshelf, and there's some books in a basket that's fairly close to the chair too. So it's inviting a child to take some time out just to sit there in the chair and have a bit of a read of books and flip through some books. Now on the right-hand side, that's another small area. So that was sort of like a dead area of the room, but you can see that it's been utilised to make it a nice, cosy space. I really like the fairy lights in the circle. That's like a hoop, a hula hoop that's just been hung from the ceiling, and the battery operated fairy lights have just been twisted around it. So really simple with the floor lamp there as well. So it makes that a nice little space that children could go into. And those fairy lights sort of conjure up imagination around the night sky too, don't they? This one is just an old teacher's desk. This is one that Sandra found in a centre actually that was sort of put away into storage. So she brought it out. That across the back there is a mirror reflecting the books and reflecting the cushions and reflecting the mat. So that's just a really simple way of making a small defined space for children. Something else that you could do with that if you wanted to make it even more psychologically contained is to throw like a tablecloth over the top of that, but have that see-through material. We call it organza in Australia. I'm not sure what you would know it as, but it's see-through, and it just young children think if they're in somewhere and there's some sort of barrier that you can't see them. even though you can see straight through it. So, you know, you might think about something like that, maybe putting something else on top of that table, but it can be just as simple as that. So think about what you might have around in your room that, you know, you could utilize like that. Natural materials can be displayed in a number of different ways to entice children to engage with them. So that one on the left is, I really like that one because it's a mirror. So children love mirrors, you know, it's all about them. So they love the mirror, and having that different perspective and that different depth, what am I trying to say? Perception with the mirror and all of the materials that they're putting on the mirror to make patterns, to count, analyze shape, a whole range of different things. The wall hanging in the middle there was done by the children too, sewing things onto a piece of hessian. So hessian is like an open weave material. And then, of course, using baskets to house all of your natural materials is much nicer than, you know, plastic containers. Adding in the nature. So then we move on to the thinking part of the brain, and we're talking now about our spaces for learning. So having a range of different spaces in our rooms makes life a little bit more interesting for the brain. So using the use of different types of spaces prompts different engagement and learning to take place throughout the room. Children have a variety of spaces designed to support specific skill development. Spaces and also spaces to take a break from the bigger group. We've got explicit teaching spaces, we've got individual or small group spaces, and spaces where the seating does not dictate what has to occur. So now let's move on and take a look at some examples of classroom design, considering the different spaces in the brain set organisation of spaces and materials. So if we use a variety of large and small defined spaces, it helps to signal the types of skills that can be developed in those areas. So flexible seating and interesting spaces encourage inquiry and self-motivated exploration when children are engaging in the materials that you've carefully and intentionally put there. Including a meeting space for stories, games and music, as most of us would have, allows opportunity for teaching skills to the bigger group. Having proximity spaces encourages children to work in pairs, individually, or in small groups. So flexible thinking by using different seating or different standing options lets children engage with materials in their own way. So you can see on the left there, we've got the rounded carpet, and we've got a couple of chairs, and we've got another space behind it. We've got the lowered ceiling, we've got books on the side, we've got the natural light, and we do have the lights on. But there's defined spaces there that suggest what can happen in those spaces. The one in the middle there, there's many of the brain set elements in there. You can see the soft lighting, the rounded corners. That shelving there is great because we can see through it, but it's still defining the space. And the one on the right-hand side, you can see that the shelving is at an angle, and that space can be used for a range of different things. Construction, there's a part in the middle that can be used for something else, and up on the big screen is the suggestion of what might happen in that space, some construction. So this is a recalibration space or a respite space. It's just a space for one child, and it has sensory elements that gives a child the time to chill out when they need it. This space could also be a table or a small space facing the wall with some sensory materials on it to soothe and calm a child who is experiencing heightened emotions. It can be really simple to put together something like that, but it really needs to be in multiple places throughout the room so that children have a time just to be by themselves. Now, really, we can make some very small but very significant changes in our rooms very easily. Some very small, inexpensive, make all the difference to the proximity spaces where singles, pairs or small groups are being invited to engage with the materials. So you can see on the left-hand side, that's the room as I found it. one day when I just visited a centre, and the teacher there just asked if I could maybe do something with that section. So you can see that there's a round table there in the middle with pretty much nothing on it, a book, really, that's all there really was. And on the left-hand side is an adult-sized table with nothing on it and just the 2 adult chairs. So I looked around the room and just found some things that I could add to these spaces that the teacher already had. So you can see the middle image there, there's a couple of cushions either side of that table, so it sort of indicates that it's a space for 2. I've put some clipboards and paper there. I've gotten a book that was related to what they were talking about within their room. Just opened the book though and put a couple of other books standing up on display next to it, just to encourage children and invite children to work at that space, and it's giving them a bit of a hint as to what they might do there as well. Now on the adult table, that's the image on the right hand side. If we go back to the left, that didn't have anything at all on it. So I scurried around and I found this throw rug, and I put that over the top as a tablecloth. And then again, we've got the clipboards there with the pens. The pens are at an angle, so the children are encouraged to just pick them up and start writing. I've pulled the chairs out slightly so they can slide into them. I've put a book there about homes. They had a bird's nest. I put that together. You can see at the back there, I found those couple of old treasure chest ideas, and I just hung some things out of the treasure chest, opened them up and put different things in them, just to encourage that little bit of inquiry and a little bit of interest and discovery. The round wooden circle there that you can see, that was like a little tray, and I put a little doily on top of that, and then the cup with all the pens in it, just to add a little bit of height and a little bit of depth and a little bit of definition. So really simple ways just to change the spaces that had nothing on it, and finishing and just adding a bit more. So we're just about to finish off now that we're on the last part, and just showing you that the room could look like this. This has a lot of the elements that Dr. Duncan was talking about and that I've just been talking about with our brain set formula for classroom design. What I want to leave you with is the comment that a calm brain is a thinking brain, and we both would like you to remember that. If you remember nothing else, think about the brain and trying to do all you can in your room to promote a calm brain.
Kathryn and I would like to leave you with this quote. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. That's exactly what we're hoping that you walk away from this presentation with, is the idea that children, when they don't bloom, it's our responsibility to fix the environment, not fix the child. We're so grateful to professionals like yourself who have shared their classrooms to support the concepts in this presentation. Thank you so much. You can reach me at this contact information, and the best place to reach me is through my website, because there's a contact form there. Just fill out the contact form and I'll get right back to you. We love to hear ideas. We love to hear what you're doing and what this presentation has inspired you to do. So please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you.
And this is my contact details right here. And I echo Sandra's comments there that we really would love you to reach out to us and share your comments, share your photos, ask for some information from us if you would like to. And we really would like to thank you too for your participation in our presentation. We've seen that there's been lots of comments through the comment box, and I'm sorry that we haven't had the opportunity to answer those as we've been going along, but we do appreciate your interaction. And you'll see that we've got a reference list that's going to follow. It's coming.
It's coming. Maybe.
While you're sharing that, I just want to stop and tell you that a lot of the comments that I was monitoring in the chat were just the fact that this is so crucial. This is so important. So